Okay, Mark, so pretty much got to give you the floor. This is sort of what I do with my guests now. I sort of ask the most general question to start off the interview, so I'm going to do so with you. I'm really just going to ask you, just give me your general impressions of the Celtics offseason that took place here in July.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, you got to give a little bit of credit to Danny Ainge because I think what happened is, a lot of people thought the Celtics were going to go after all those big names, LaMarcus Aldridge, Kevin Love, all those guys that were free and on the free agent market. But I think Danny Ainge realized from the very beginning, and he did his homework behind the scenes to realize that those guys weren't necessarily attainable, at least to come join the Boston Celtics. So I think what he did is he switched gears and he said, okay, now who are the guys that I can get? Who are the guys that can come in and help? Who are the guys that I can bring back that we want in this program? I think that's exactly what he did. Jerebko's coming back. Crowder's coming back. Amir Johnson comes in. There's potential trades that could happen in the future to strengthen this team. And obviously he kept all 4 draft picks, and hopefully, as we saw during Summer League, 3 of those guys should be able to hopefully contribute and help this team this season. So I think, all things considered, a lot of people are going to be upset that he didn't hit the home run that a lot of people thought that he would be able to do this offseason. But at the same time, he brought in some talent, and at the same time, he continued to maintain his flexibility. He's got all those options that he had on the table heading into this offseason and during last season that he can still capitalize on moving forward.
But where do you sort of come down on the fact that, first off, I think a lot of us do hope that the team improves upon last year regardless, because it is a young team and you want to see that out of a young team regardless. Where do you sort of come down on where the roster stands in terms of being able to have the potential to improve this coming season? I mean, it's great that this team has, all the, flexibility assets, whatever we want to, those famous words that we describe, we want to call it. But you still would like to see the, franchise make a step in the right direction because that would mean, greater value for individual talents on the team. Do you think the roster is capable of making a leap to, say, a 45-win, threshold next year?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think every year that you move forward with a young crop of players and you add to that young crop of players with other guys that you drafted this season, those players are all going to get better incrementally every single season, especially with this coaching staff. You've seen that these guys, Brad Stevens, Jay Larranaga, all these guys on this staff, they bring the best out of their players. So every year that these players are in that system, I'd be shocked if they don't improve. I mean, Jared Sullinger's gotten better every single season. Marcus Smart's going to continue to get better. All these guys, I expect James Young to get better. I'm not necessarily saying that he's going to make a major contribution this season, but he's going to be better than he was last season. So every season that you move forward with those young players, they're going to get better. And as a result, the team is going to get better, especially when you add in some talent around those young guys to help improve the team.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the young players, be it Young and say Marcus Smart. I know you were out in Las Vegas for the Summer League. I do want to get to that because I really haven't discussed about the Summer League on the show. But how do you feel about the roster? There have been complaints about the roster, a congested roster, myself included. I sort of led the charge, and I mentioned sort of like the Perry Drones trade, which occurred like about a week ago now. Are you okay with this roster? Do you think this could bring possible competition within the roster and that could be a good thing? Or are you a little weary with how the roster situation stands?
Well, I think competition is always a good thing. I mean, I don't think there's a coach out there that would say, oh, I want to go into camp with my top 7 guys, clear cut. Everybody wants competition because that creates a better environment during practices. It makes the team better. The Celtics back in 2008 when they won the championship, everyone knew who their best players were, but the environment during practice is what made that team so good, and it's because it was so competitive. I'm not saying that the team's going to be like that this year, but competition is a good thing. And then, I do think that this team is going to be solid. I think that the team is going to improve, and I do think that flexibility and being able to play multiple positions is very important in the Brad Stevens system, and I think that the majority of this team is able to do that. I mean, everyone that was brought back, you got Jerebko and Crowder, both of those guys, that's why they were brought back. They can play multiple positions on offense and defense. I think that's very important to Brad Stevens. And same thing with some of these young guys coming in. I think you're going to see Rozier play multiple positions as well. Some of the other guys that are being brought in through free agency or trade, I think they're all going to play multiple positions. So I think that's where the NBA is going. We saw it with the Warriors this past season when they won the title. Everyone could play multiple positions. And, that's just a movement where the NBA is going, and I think the team is set up to be able to play that type of basketball this coming season.
I have to go back to your comments you made on the 2008 Celtics. It's interesting how you mentioned the environment that they had in practices and in the pre-camps, be it over in Italy. And sure enough, the Celtics team is going to be doing some traveling before the season. But that team actually really did not have a set rotation. I remember Tony Allen coming off the bench in the 5th game of that final series against LA, and I was utterly horrified that he was coming into the game because he hadn't played it seemed like eons, and he was just coming in for crucial minutes of the finals. That's sort of like the one example that you could have about a roster having 12 guys going 12 deep and no one really having a set role, of course, outside of Pierce, Garnett, Ray Allen. Because even Rajon Rondo was on and off the bench. He'd sit at the end of games and whatnot during that season. So I think that's sort of like the one good example. But then I go back to last year, and I really felt like that team came together when some of those pieces were sort of shipped out. We don't have to name any names. And there were guys here who kind of carved out roles for themselves quickly. And I thought that's when that team really started to play well, because that's when they started to play together, I thought.
Yeah, and I get that. But at the same time, if I'm running the Celtics, if I'm Danny Ainge, I want the most talent that I can possibly have on the team, and that's going 1 through 15. If the 15th guy can play, that's great. That's great. That's a great problem to have on any single night. You never know what injuries are going to come up. You never know what's going to happen during practice. You never know if someone's going to do something where they need to be disciplined. You never know. So the more talent, in my opinion, the better. And the more competition, the better. And I think, once things settle out, usually after the training camp in the first month of the season, the coach is going to have a pretty good idea who's going to be in that rotation. He's not going to play 12 every single night. He's going to play 8, 9, maybe 10 every single night. I think those guys are going to separate themselves within a month or so of the regular season starting, if this is the team that does go into training camp.
Yeah, see, I'm afraid we're going to have to agree to disagree there. I'm still very concerned, because all it takes is 1 3-game losing streak, 4-game losing streak, lose 5 out of 7. One player sitting at the end of the bench who thinks that he should be playing and isn't playing, and all it takes is just one player to come out and start complaining in the paper. And and there's just so many other factors as well. I think that it is better to have.
I don't want to cut you off, but 2 things that I got to say. Number one. If you're a title contender, that's one thing. This team isn't competing for a title. This team is competing for the playoffs. And there aren't any veterans that are coming into this team that are guys that are known as complaining, guys that complain about playing time. David Lee, if he does wind up on the Boston Celtics, that guy is a great teammate. He's been a great teammate since the moment he came into the NBA with the New York Knicks. You've got Amir Johnson, great teammate. You've got Jerebko, great teammate. All of these guys are great people, and they've never complained about their playing time. Even Jerebko, when he was out in Detroit and he wasn't playing very much, he didn't complain. He just waited for his moment, and his moment arrived in Boston. So I don't anticipate any of those issues arising with the Celtics this season, just because of the people that they put into this program. I think they put the depth on the team with the character that's going to allow them to do that. And like I said, I do think that 8, 9, 10 guys are going to separate themselves from the rest when all is said and done, because there's a potential that you're going to have 3 rookies on this team, and there's not a guarantee that those guys are going to be in that everyday rotation.
Well, to sort of finish that part of the conversation off, if it is around January 10th and there is some uneasiness on the team, feel free to think of me. But at the same time, I will think of you if I am proven wrong.
There you go.
The expectations going into this season. They won 40 games last year, and they finished the regular season. I don't even know what it was. They were like 10 games over 500 from some point in the season till the end. One of the better
2011, I think, something like that.
One of the better teams in the Eastern Conference since February 2nd or something like that. So even though there were some fans who were even slightly disappointed at the draft and the offseason and not signing the big names or whatever, the majority of the fan base, I'd say 80% of the fan base, thinks that they're going to win 40-some games, get back into the playoffs again. And I would say that's still a decent amount in terms of expectation-wise. Are you a little worried that if there is a possible letdown next season, be it the team is once again a 41-win team, which I would consider a success for this team, a 41-win team, or less, they fall back out of the playoffs, are you worried that those expectations could become an issue on, going into this year?
It's hard to say, but the one thing that I love about the Celtics fan base and New England sports fan base in general is they get it. They got it when this rebuild, when Danny Ainge hit the button and restarted this whole thing. They've gotten it the past couple seasons. I do feel that, right now is a time where people are going to start to potentially get frustrated if the team isn't competing for titles over the next couple seasons. But I do think that in the back of everyone's mind, they get it. They get that this team doesn't have the super duper star that you need to compete for a title. They get that this team plays its butts off every single night, and that's why they got into the playoffs last season. So it's hard to say. I do think that it's getting close to that time though, where the fan base is going to say, okay, well, it's been a couple years. When are we going to get to that upper echelon of the NBA? But it's tough to say. The Eastern Conference is going to be pretty deep this season. I'm not saying deep in terms of title contenders, but deep in terms of teams that can compete for the playoffs. And you have a couple games go the wrong way last season, you're not in the playoffs. So it's not like it's going to be a walk in the park to try to get into the postseason this year. Winning 40 to 45 games, you hope that that's going to be able to be done, because in my opinion, this team has upgraded its talent. Upgraded its talent from last season. You're going to have Isaiah Thomas here for the entire season. He should be healthy by the time training camp rolls around. Hopefully you improve through the draft. So I do think that 40 to 45 wins is attainable, and I do think this team can get into the playoffs. But at the same time, you got to look at a bunch of other teams in the Eastern Conference that have improved as well. The Miami Heat, I expect them to be in there. So, one team's got to go in, one team's got to go out. We'll figure that out at the end of the season. But I do think the Celtics will be there competing.
Yeah, you did mention the mindset of the fans and how it is a pretty intelligent fan base, and I would certainly agree with that. I know that there are some aspects of the media that like to just take a big paintbrush out and start painting and throwing sort of slang terms regarding certain members of fans. We're not going to discuss that because I just think it's just a silly way to sort of deflect arguments. But I would say, as I mentioned, the fan base is operating under assumptions that the team is going to take a leap next year, and I am worried that even if the team wins like 40 games, still plays very hard, last year the fans really came to appreciate that team because they played hard. It was like, wow, look at this team play so hard. Now everyone's just going to assume that they play hard every single night. And if they do win like 40 to 42 games, play hard, it's still going to be like, well, that's what we expect of them now.
Yeah, I could see that happening. But in the back of my mind, I think that this current crop that Danny Ainge has put together, this team just needs to kind of bide its time. Just get through potentially half this season, 3/4 of this season, potentially through the whole season. And then I really do think within the next 18 months, Danny's going to be able to make that move. And on some level, he's got way too many assets, way too many contracts that a lot of other teams would like to have to not be able to make a big-time move. I really, truly believe that he's going to be able to make it happen within the next 18 months. I'm not guaranteeing that, but I think he's had it in his mind that between this offseason that just happened and the next 1 to 2, something big is going to happen, and he's set himself up to be able to do it. So that's why I think that this current group just kind of needs to bide its time, play hard, win games, potentially make the postseason, and bide its time until Danny can strike when the iron's hot and get that big time player in here.
Well, it could happen tomorrow. Remember, today is Sunday, July 26th, and usually the majority offseason is over with. But if you remember back in 2007, that Garnett trade was on the 31st of July. It came out entirely out of nowhere. But yeah, you're right. It's entirely predicated on the fact of who's going to be out there via trade. And you're right, the Celtics are in good position. I do say if we were going to talk about sort of biding time and winning games next year, that's sort of the expectations that I have for next year, or not expectations, what I would like to see. And I am going to admit I am a fan, so I do hope that really the individuals improve next year. I think that is almost as important as the team improving, say, making a leap from 42 to 45 wins. Whoever thought we would be saying that about the Boston Celtics when it's always been about the collective, it's always been about the greater good. But I think if we are going to talk about making that transformative trade for the Celtics, it has to come down to certain players on the roster making an individual move, which actually, gets me to Summer League. I am going to sort of talk about individual players here, but you were out there in Las Vegas in the blistering heat, I would assume, right? It's July. It's not
cold.
Sort of Vegas time. You want to give me any Summer League impressions that you got from out there?
Yeah, well, I liked what I saw. I think a lot of people are going to look at Marcus Smart's shooting numbers and say, oh, well, he didn't do exactly, what we hoped he would do. But if you watched him out there, I wrote a story that I put on Celtics.com. The reason or the way that you know that you're an NBA player is when you know that you shouldn't be in the Summer League. And that's exactly what everyone at both Salt Lake City and Vegas thought when they were watching Marcus Smart play. He looked like a player that was on another level from the rest of the guys. He played harder. He had more intensity. He was better off the dribble. He was good in the pick and roll. He did everything except shoot the ball lights out. And he did shoot the ball well in Salt Lake City. He just didn't shoot it well in Vegas. But I loved what I saw out of him. He looked like a guy that was ready to make that leap going into this coming season until obviously the injury happened, which kind of knocked the Celtics out of that title contention. But I liked what I saw out of him. James Young obviously got off to a pretty slow start. Got out with that injury to his groin and then finally came back. I did love what I saw out of him out of those last couple games. I think the last game that he played in was actually the most aggressive that I've seen him at any point during his Celtics career. I'm talking practice sessions, scrimmages, preseason. Anytime that he got into a regular season game, he looked comfortable in that last game. So that's a step forward for him. And hopefully, I think with him, it's all between the ears. If he's confident, he's going to play well. If he's not confident, he's going to struggle. So hopefully he can figure that out. And then the rookies, I think, showcased quite a bit. Jordan Mickey really stood out. He was great at both ends of the court. It really looks like he's got a lot more offense than a lot of people thought. Rozier can walk in and play defense right off the bat, just like Avery Bradley and Marcus Smart when the Celtics drafted them. And then R.J. Hunter, he started to really show his true colors toward the end of that Vegas Summer League when he's scoring points, making plays off the dribble, and I think that's what a lot of people expect him to be able to do at the NBA level. I'm not quite sure that those rookies are going to contribute major minutes this season. A couple of them might see some time up in Maine, but I do think that they're solid prospects, and if all continues as it has in the past few seasons with the way that these young guys have developed under this coaching staff and up in Maine, I think those guys have bright futures.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to talk a little bit about Rozier because he's going to be under a microscope largely because he was a selection that many fans and even media members just really didn't see coming. But I admit I did not watch the Summer League. I mentioned in the opening of the show how I used to avidly follow the Summer League, particularly when it was here in Boston. And I sort of mentioned that when it was here in Boston, like it was a couple years ago when it was over 10 years ago now, where it's been long gone. But I did look at the numbers, and I did see the Marcus Smart shooting numbers, and it was like 26%. And you're telling me you're being pretty adamant about it that he was exceptional out there in Vegas.
He was a standout. There's no doubt about that. He was a standout, and also you got to remember he was taking days off, so it's not like he was staying in the same groove the whole time. This team wasn't really practicing while it was in Vegas because it had already been going for a couple weeks straight. But if you really want to look at the true numbers, look at his first game or two in Vegas and then all of his Salt Lake City games. He played great in Salt Lake City, shot the ball lights out from what I can remember. But pretty much every media member there and NBA executives, they were all looking at Marcus Smart and thinking in their heads, this guy does not belong here. He belongs watching on the sideline with Damian Lillard sitting on the Trailblazers bench. Amir Johnson sitting on the Celtics bench. These guys are veterans. They're established in the NBA, and I think that's exactly where Marcus Smart's going to be a couple years down the line. He's ready to make a leap. I'm not going to say he's going to be an all-star or a 15, 20-point-per-game scorer, but he is going to make a leap. He's going to be better this coming season than he will last season. I'll guarantee that.
And Terry Rozier, if you would like to sort of add any more detail what you said about him,
I think, like I said, he can walk in and play defense from day one. He's a great defender. He's on offense. He's got a solid burst. I think what he's got to figure out is he a point guard or is he a shooting guard or is he going to be that type of combo guard that the NBA is starting to get used to. I think he's got to learn to play a little bit in the pick and roll. I do think he does need to learn how to finish a little bit around the basket. His offensive game is a little bit raw. There's no doubt about that. At Louisville, he could put up 17 points per game simply because of his athleticism and his burst which is elite. I mean, he's got a great first step, a great burst off the dribble, but he's really got to refine those little things like his pick and roll game, his jumper, and his ability to finish. But not many players come into the NBA able to do all of those things. Those guys are top 5 picks. This guy was chosen in the middle of the first round, and I think the Celtics are going to be patient with him. He's not going to be a star right now. I think the Celtics think he might be able to get to that level in the future, but it's going to take time. People have to be patient with Terry Rozier. This isn't a guy who's going to walk in and from day one be a lottery pick type talent, because that's not where he was chosen. They've got to be patient with him, let him develop. That's why the Celtics picked him. They think that he's got the work ethic, they think that he's got the personality, and they think that he's got the talent to be able to eventually turn into the player that a lot of people said, oh, maybe this guy could have been a lottery pick last season before he went into this past season at Louisville. Well, they think that he can get up to that level, and I think it's just going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, I mentioned how earlier I think he's largely under that microscope, not even because of where he was chosen. It was mainly because we talked about expectations going into the season. Well, there were huge expectations going into that draft. I mean, and I would argue that the Celtics created the expectations when they put on their official Twitter account a quote from Danny Ainge, how adamant he was about trading up. So when you come out of that draft and Rozier was essentially if you want to call it that is creating expectations on him, whether they are fair or unfair, to deliver and to produce. And I think it's almost bizarre that if he actually works out, it's going to be like, oh, yeah, well, I mean, he should have worked out. He was a mid-first round draft choice. And if he flops, say if he comes another Fab Melo, I want to say Danny Ainge gets crucified. But there's going to be some sort of, water balloons being thrown his way all over Terry Rozier.
Yeah, and that's understandable. At the same time, people got to understand the Celtics didn't choose him at 17 because they thought that he was going to be there at 33 or 28, right? They chose him at 17 because they knew he was going to be gone. There were multiple other teams that were going to choose this guy. He was high on a lot of people's draft board, and he was high on the Celtics draft board since the season started. So they're high on him. I think a lot of people just got to be patient with him. Look, he's the 17th pick every single year, doesn't walk in the door and start playing basketball in the NBA and playing at a high level. That just doesn't happen. Lottery picks do that. People need to have patience because this guy was not a lottery pick. He was chosen 17th overall, and I think it's going to take him a little bit of time to be able to actually show why the Celtics invested that pick in him.
All right. I'm not going to ask you predictions about the upcoming season, whether they're going to win 45, 40, blah, 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 blah. But the schedule is coming out in 2 weeks, or I think a week and a half, or whatever it is. It's coming out soon. And now all of a sudden, for whatever reason, be it the NFL and I guess the NBA, the schedule being released is an event in itself. Where will the Celtics be on Christmas Day? That is the question I will ask you.
I think they'll be watching from home. If you're going to ask, because look, like I said earlier, the Celtics aren't competing for a title this year, and they don't have a superstar on the roster. And that's on Christmas Day. That's what the NBA wants to market. They want to market title contenders and superstars. The Celtics are not in either of those categories. So realistically, in my mind, I do not think that they'll be playing on Christmas Day. I hope I'm wrong because it's a great event. It showcases some of the best teams and talent in the NBA. And if they think that the Celtics have that type of talent, great. Slot us in there. I'll work on Christmas Day. I'll try to get up some stories and some videos that everyone would like to see. But I'm not counting on it. I just don't think that they're in that category yet.
There's 5 games though. What's so nuts about Christmas Day is, once you turn about, I would like to say 20, but for me it was like 12. My parents were a little cheap on the other ones. Once you turn 12, Christmas Day almost becomes just like a nuisance. Like all the stores are closed, so it's like and I can't watch 5 games. I am not a degenerate gambler that will just sit there and just watch 5 games straight through on Christmas Day, but I do have to admit, I do need this the Celtics entertainment aspect. Even though they're not a championship contender, it's like there's 5 games, it's 10 teams.
Yeah.
I still feel like just there's enough Celtics fans to watch the Celtics on Christmas Day. If you want to throw them at noon, what the heck?
Yeah.
9 o'clock for people on the West Coast, not gonna watch it anyways.
Yeah, but there's the teams like last season, the Lakers. They're not contending, but they've got Kobe. You know, there's all of those teams out there that even the Trailblazers, they're not contending, but they've got Damian Lillard. They've got a guy who's an upper echelon player. The Celtics just aren't there yet. I mean, Isaiah Thomas is the closest guy, and I don't think people across the country are going to tune in to watch Isaiah Thomas. I just don't think it's at that level yet. If the Celtics turn into a title contender and he's the second best player, now you're talking.
Yeah, I'm reaching. I'm not gonna lie. I do need something. I'm already trying to line up for me what is the most emptier days of my life. Sadly, I guess I'm admitting too much personally, but
hey, it's always nice to have something tied in when you wake up on Christmas, right? You want to have your guys playing.
I do. All right, Marc D'Amico, Celtics analyst and reporter for Celtics.com. Thanks so much for stopping by the show once again.
Hey, no problem. Anytime.
That's Marc D'Amico, and you can follow Marc on Twitter at Marc_D'Amico. We'll be back with Celtics Beat after a few words.